All right, so this is just another raw video. Obviously, it's not edited. It's a one take wonder. So let's see how it goes. But I'll start with telling you a bit of a story about why I'm doing this video and what inspired it. So Deb recently got this book called The Greatest Secret. It's a continuation of the original Secret, which came out, when was it, like 2004, something like that. And spoiler alert, The Greatest Secret is about becoming more awareness, okay? And so you're trained to become aware of things, and to be fair, it is probably the fundamental practice, that combined with meditation. It is a meditation. It's probably the definition of meditation, but a waking awareness meditation. But it's like, you get into chapter 3 or 4 or whatever, and Deb says to me, so I need you to read this book because I'm getting into it now, and she says to start practicing 15 minutes a day of awareness. And I start laughing because I know the question that's coming is, so what am I practicing? How do I become more aware? Like, what am I being aware of, right? And so let's see if we can break this down a bit and give you something to put your teeth into, and that you can hang on to and you can chew on a bit and maybe get some kind of ground, or grounding from it. And so the first thing that from my point of view, that we need to understand is that becoming aware is another way of saying going from micro to macro thinking, or to going to a meta level of thinking, right? Or a meta level of observing things, being aware of things. And so what do I mean by that? So it's kind of, I think I've used this metaphor before, but it's kind of like if we look at the computer, okay, and on there you've got applications and icons and stuff like that. This is basically the norm way of thinking is you click on this, it does that, and it gets you that result. It's a linear way of thinking, a sequential way of thinking. But when we're talking about awareness or meta level thinking, it's like, okay, now I understand the programs, icons, but now I'm going to go deeper into how they're built, how they're constructed. And then the ultimate goal is to get to a level of awareness, I think, where you have so much of a generalized, not a specialized necessarily, although that will come, but you have a generalized understanding, a map of the entire terrain, of the internal workings of a computer, how it actually works. So when a program doesn't work the way you want it to work, you understand what's going on and how to recode that program. You know how to reprogram it to get what you actually want out of it, right? And so how does this apply, right? So we need to look, because we're talking meta here. It's not like we could just understand it one way. We need to understand it from multiple different angles, right? Because we're looking at a multi-dimensional shape here, right? Which is intangible, okay? So it's invisible and intangible, but it has a very real effect if you can understand the concept here. A concept is also a meta level of a meta level construct, okay? So we're going from content to context, okay, and concept. And so another way of saying this is you're looking at what structures contain many things that you can work on at once. So instead of looking at different things inside the container and going, that's this, that's this, that's that, you're looking at basically the framework, the architecture of what contains all that stuff. And so a good example of that, of a meta level container or frame or architecture, is space and time. Okay, within infinite space, all things are contained within the space, and within time space, all times and timelines are contained within time space, if that makes sense. So how do you start becoming aware of things, right? How do you practice awareness when we're talking about these meta sort of level concepts? And so there's a few questions to ask yourself and a direction you can start with, okay? So the first thing to become aware of, I think, that is of value straight away, and something you can start practicing daily to work on, is asking yourself, where in my day, where in my life do I find myself acting from a emotional, unconscious place, right? Where my body responds to feelings, even though I might be thinking something totally different, right? So for example, perfect example is the chocolate cake, all right? Oh, my body's craving this chocolate cake. I'm getting lifted out of my chair to go get chocolate cake. Like, the craving is so intense. Even though my mind says I shouldn't have the chocolate cake because, that'll blow my calorie intake out for the day, and that means I'm not going to hit my weight loss goal, for example. Okay. So another thing at work, someone ticks you off at work or cuts you off in traffic, and that there's no point getting upset about that, because maybe there's nothing you can do, or it's so childish to even react to it, but you feel that fire lighting you up, that anger, the indignant feeling. You're like, how dare they, right? Or a real common one is you've just been through that breakup, and that person's no good for you, or not even they're not good for you, they're just, it's done, it's time for you to move on, or for them to go in their direction, you to go in your direction. There's nothing wrong with the relationship maybe, but it's just come to its end. So you make that decision, and then all of a sudden you get the cravings of wanting that person back and going through those motions again. So look, there's nothing wrong with eating the chocolate cake, or having a moment of you bitch about, or you rant about something that happened to you that day to someone who's willing to listen, or craving certain people in your life. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, when are you riding the emotion, and when is the emotion riding you? And when the emotion is riding you, you don't necessarily have to stop yourself or do something else or replace it with anything. Like, that's down the track. The first thing you need to do is become aware that you are in those modes. So awareness is so valuable, because you can't change anything until you become aware of it. As soon as you become aware of it, the observer effect kicks in, and you merely, the act of observing a certain thing, whether it's out there in the physical or it's internal in the energetic, in the neurology, that is going to instigate a snowball effect through time, over time, of change. All right, so another example of this that I found really useful, and this is on an intangible level too, so it's a bit in the woo-woo scene, so this can relate to all sorts of things, is that when you decide that you want to start lucid dreaming, what's the first thing they get you to do? What's the first practice? It's not, incubate yourself into, everything that makes you think about flying. And so when you go into a dream state, you can just lift off the ground and start flying, or, watch everything you can on teleportation and time travel and shape-shifting, and then when you're in a dream you can overcome and go beyond the laws of Newtonian physical physics. First thing they get you to do is to ask yourself, am I dreaming? Is this a dream? Am I dreaming? I'm becoming aware that I may be dreaming. I'm becoming aware of this dream. Okay? And one of the tools that I used, apart from many books that I read on this subject and watching videos on YouTube and other people's ideas and incubating that idea into my mind, is a tool called the Lucid Dream Induction, which was a audio program that came from, I'm not sure exactly where, that I can't really share because it's not mine, but I can give you the background and the concept of it. And basically it was like a meditation track, and the whole time it was this guy whispering in the background, am I dreaming? This is a dream. And the more aware I become of the dream, the more awake I am within the dream. And the more that I wake up in the dream, the more things become real. And it just would loop in and out, and backwards and forwards, and it would just hit this idea that I'm dreaming and I'm awake, and the more awake I become, the more real the dream comes, and the more I realize I'm dreaming, the more awake I become, and the more awake I become, the more I realize the dream. It's a dream. It's all a dream, and I can become awake in the dream. And it would just go on and on and on for like an hour and a half, looping. And you're not even meant to consciously listen to this, okay? This was something that you would play, you would drift off either to sleep, or you'd have playing in the background, you wouldn't even pay attention to. And what happens is it starts to seep into the unconscious mind in a calm, relaxed manner, in an easy and effortless way. And before you know it, more and more of your neurology starts to move over towards that idea, and neuronets begin to be constructed in the mind, and then they start to fire and wire together, and energy goes, and consciousness and energy goes through the neurology, and that neurology starts to have an effect on the field, and it starts to vibrate in a particular signature frequency, and then that vibration gets stronger and stronger and ripples out further and further. And before you know it, it starts to become part of you. All right, so another example of this concept of building neurology and having it broadcast itself into the field, or to more tangible reason to do this, and to build structures in the mind, is because it's like a new program. It starts to construct this new architecture. You start to fill it in with all the things that are related to this idea. And then once it's there and you see an opportunity, or you see something becomes more familiar to you, you'll start to act on it more and more, and you'll start to reinforce it, and we'll have this self-fulfilling prophetic loop going on that that eventually you don't have to put any effort in, because it becomes an unconscious competence program that you have created for your own specific purposes and outcomes. In other words, a customized program. All right. So one of the things that, when we talk about making change and overcoming addictions and things like that, is that when you look at addictive behaviors or habits that are not useful, there's no effort to them. You do them unconsciously. You do them automatically. They get fired off in particular ways at particular times under certain circumstances, and there's no effort on your behalf. In other words, you have mastered that behavior so well that you have to not even think about doing it. So wouldn't it be nice to transfer that mastery into something that is going towards and attracting to you the kind of future and behaviors and things, people, places, times, events that you actually are wanting, right? And so another way to build your awareness and strength. So we talked about frames and structures and things, but now we're getting into building neurology in the mind. And the neurology, the way we strengthen that is we start to add more and more neurons that are being used for things that are unnecessary, that we don't want to create anymore, and retask them into something that is going to be useful. So in other words, if we go back to the computer analogy, we're deleting old programs, we're freeing up disk space, and we're using that disk space to construct and operate new programming that will automatically produce and get what we want out of our life and out of ourselves and out of our environment and out of people and places, times, events, perhaps. And so one of the old practices that a lot of different schools of thought have used, especially in the Buddhist traditions, is candle focus. Okay, now why do we do candle focus? What is the point of staring at a candle like for hours on end, days, months, years? What's the purpose of that? And so one of the ways I was brought to an understanding of this practice is that, and they're talking about using the candle focus technique to activate the 1,000-petaled lotus, or open the crown. Okay, what does that mean? What does this mean? Like my aura starts to open up and it just spreads out like a big lotus flower. What is that? I don't understand that. So you gotta remember that the metaphors used to describe certain happenings were created from a language, and it's a translated language. So Tibetan and Sanskrit is being translated into English, and this is what we get out of it, right? This is what we have to work with, is a translation. We know how much gets lost in translation. You just try and tell anyone, if you're interested in what I'm saying, you try to tell anyone what I've just said, it's going to come out different, and they're going to interpret your Chinese whisper, your 6 degrees of separation down the grapevine differently to how you interpreted this coming from me. Just like I'm interpreting and translating it differently from what I'd learned and how I got this information, how I'm sequencing it and summarizing it. And so what I understood, and this may not be right because this is only what I understood from it, is that when you're looking at the candle flickering, your attention is being directed to a small area within a bigger area, okay? And as you keep focusing on this, or sometimes it's just your breath, okay? It's an even harder one, I think, because this, at least you can focus on something outside of you. And as you deepen your gaze and relax even more and start to switch brain frequencies while focusing on that point and watching the changes happen and the subtle movements, and trying to redirect just like a target, holding your focus in the center of the target as long as you can. Whenever it comes off, you just go back. When you do this and practice this long enough, what happens is inevitably you're going to start daydreaming about all sorts of weird shit that you've even forgotten about that's not even important. And you're going to retask all of those neurons to focus on this instead. And what you're doing here is you're building a network of neurons, or a neural net. Just like linking computers together to get more and more processing power to do a specific task. Now, we haven't really chosen a task yet as such. We're using the candle focus as the target, as the task to build the neurology. And what happens here is if you do this long enough and you stare, at first you're just trying to focus and you're blinking and your focus is going off and you're coming back and you're sort of doing this, and then you wander off into the future, and then you come back, and then you wander off to the past, and then you come back, and it's like, I'm kind of hungry, and then you come back, and my back hurts, and you come back, and what's the point of all this, and all the mind chatter, and I hate Brett's face, and you come back. And you do this until all of a sudden everything is lined up and focused and you're relaxed. And what you'll notice, especially with a candle, this is different because it's a video and it's a light. But if you do this with a candle, your brain will start to switch into, like in a camera, an old camera will start to go into the different light spectrum parts of the mind, the brain, like infrared. And the flame, although it will be there and you'll see it, will change color, and almost the flame itself will look black with a halo around it, or a hue around it. And if you keep going even deeper and you switch into, say, theta state or delta, and you're still awake, then you'll start to lose clarity on whether the candle is out in front of you or it's actually inside your mind. Because you'll realize that what you're actually seeing is not seen with the eyes. It's interpreted by the brain and reconstructed in the visual cortex, and that's what you're perceiving. And you're not actually sure what's outside there, because you're only going off the interpretation of the neurology that you have hooked up to the input, which is the eye. So you won't know if the candle you're seeing is accurate, or if it's a distortion or a creation or a deletion of something more. Regardless, because that's unknowable at this stage in the video at least, is that you are starting to direct a cluster of neurology all over the brain, in every part of the brain, all on one specific task. Physiologically, it's in different parts of the brain: neocortex, midbrain, lower cerebellum, uvula oblongata, whatever it is, the frontal lobe, the visual cortex, the spine, the brain stem in the back, the reptilian part of the brain. All of that is starting to focus in on one point, one specific task. And when you've done this long enough and trained in it over and over and over to the point of nausea and beyond, you'll break through and you'll start to create a link between all the neurology in all parts of the brain in every state: beta, alpha, theta, delta, and gamma. And in every light spectrum: visible light, ultraviolet, X-ray, gamma ray, infrared, all that sort of stuff. Not only that, is that as you're doing that, you're hearing sounds as well, or not sounds. And now you bring in the sense of hearing. You're bringing in the sensation of sensing, kinesthetic. You're bringing in the sense of olfactory, taste. You're bringing in creating a synesthesia between all these states and sensory inputs, all directed towards one particular task, and you're becoming aware that that's what you're doing. And so every time you get distracted, every time you have a thought, every time you have emotion, you realize that's not preventing you from the task. That's your mind, subconscious, conscious, whatever part, accessing more and more neurology to go towards that particular task. And if you do that long enough and you hit the critical mass, and then you get that snowball effect, eventually the whole brain, if we were to look at it under an EEG, would light up like a Christmas tree, and you would get this big flash on the screen where every neuron is connected all at once to one specific task. And they call that the 1,000-petal lotus, or the opening of the third eye, let's say, or the crown chakra opening. And so theoretically, maybe not completely, because some things are going to breathing, pumping blood, but a good majority of the brain is now networked towards focusing on a particular task. Now, once you have that, it's like having an army of, bots all over the world, and, accessing all these computers everywhere and going, all right, now we're going to solve a mathematical problem that would normally take my desktop 10,000 years to process, but now it's only going to take 10 minutes because we have all this processing power all going towards the one problem, the one task. Once you got this momentum going and this access to it, and you practice going in and out of it, then it doesn't take much to substitute that with something else. All right, some other task. What can we use as an example? We can put it into this, right? And now you can perceive all the detail and the texture and the properties of this and the effect as an example. And so now, with all that processing power, that observation, all those neurons focusing on one particular thing, now when you practice awareness, especially like we go back to the chocolate cake problem, what you're going to do is you're going to feel that urge to go eat the chocolate cake, and you're going to realize that that's a biological drive and a neurological program that has been created and is firing off perfectly without any effort at all, without any activation or guidance from you consciously. And now, instead of just acting on that, you can start to replace it with a thought of something else: being healthy, being active, being fit, being aesthetically in the shape, the ultimate shape of your healthiest, fittest, strongest self, for example. And so now every time the cake comes up, instead of buying into the feeling, you're going, that one, I'm going to use the neurology that is going towards the drive to eat the cake, to get in the car and go down the road and buy it and eat it. And then all the consequences and all the looping and shit that I have to go through to get back to this point again. And I'm going to use that, and I'm going to replace the image now with my future self being fit, healthy, strong, active, nimble, flexible, adaptable. And so now that you understand the concept and you've seen some of the framework, now you can start to substitute the values with anything that you choose, right? You'll start to notice that when, yesterday it was the chocolate cake, now it's the drive to be angry and to feel indignant. And I'm going to go, okay, well, now I'm going to use that neurology to go towards health, feeling good, moving towards bliss, moving towards contentment, happiness, joy, boredom even. Just be bored. Being bored is better than being angry. Yeah, I get an emotional rush out of it, but if there's no cleanup after it. And boredom is a really great platform to step into contentment. And we can start to edge into the higher and higher states of emotion. And so over time, you start to map out everything, become aware of all these things. And now you have the neurology to start to flip them into something else. And so how do we start to build a neuro network, an architecture for things that we haven't done before? We don't even know how to approach. And so the first thing you need to do is start to build a basic vocabulary in things. And I'm not just talking about words, I'm talking about a basic understanding of the subject matter that you're going to create a context for. And so, I talk about jiu-jitsu a lot because I'm into martial arts. It's something I find fascinating. But learning jiu-jitsu is a whole different ball game because, it's like, not only is it like a new language, but it's a new language. It's like learning a new language in a totally new environment, okay? And so, when you start out, it's like, well, what do I learn first? I get into this and I don't even know what to pay attention to. I don't even know what to become aware of. I'm just here. And so one of the guys said, I watch these videos and this guy's explaining certain things in it. And he's so good at articulating. And I said, yeah, I tried watching those, I have to go back to them. But when I was watching them, it was information overload. I didn't even know what to choose. I didn't even know what to pay attention to. I didn't know what was relevant. And it's like when you get into this internal work, this neurological technology, this biohacking, this information biology subject, which doesn't really have much of a lexicon for. It doesn't have enough words, in my opinion, to articulate what we're focusing on. And so you sort of go around and grabbing bits and pieces of here, there, and everywhere. And at first you can fall into the trap of straining to try and grasp onto ideas and go, this is what I should be learning, this is what I should be doing, this is what I should be thinking, this is what I shouldn't do. But if we go back to the lucid dream induction track that I was talking about, sometimes all you need to do is expose yourself long enough to a particular idea until enough neurology and neural networks get built around it to the point you can actually work with it. Okay, you can't start living in a house that doesn't have a structure. Okay, you can't decide what. There's no point going out and picking tiles and curtains and carpets and color scheme for your house if you don't even know what the house is going to look like, or what framework it's going to take, or you don't have any walls up. So you need to build the vocabulary, you need to build the architecture. And so how do you do that? You start to just sort of relax and troll and have it there around you. Start introducing it into you, start becoming aware of certain things about it until you get something that you can start molding, something you can play with. You need to attract enough, have enough gravity going into that speck of dust until it's something that you can get a hold of. And until then, there's no point trying to do something with it. The only thing you should be doing is exposing yourself to it and bringing more awareness to it, building more and more of a neural net, more and more neurology to it.